Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The air in the living room was suffocating, but not because of the heat. She sat alone on the far side of the long velvet couch, her eyes wide with pain and disbelief as his mother paced back and forth, waving a document like a dagger. The woman's voice, cold and sharp, pierced through the heavy silence. Sign it, or leave my son alone. You will never have a kobo from this family. No one intervened. Not even her fiancé. He stood behind his mother, shoulders slightly hunched, lips sealed, his eyes avoiding hers like a coward hiding behind silence. The girl stared at him, desperately searching for a flicker of the man she once believed in, the one she had built her whole life around. But he didn't speak. He didn't even move. All she could feel was the ache of betrayal pressing into her chest as the words, "Leave my son alone," echoed like gunshots in her head. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "After everything," she whispered. But her words were swallowed by his mother's laugh. She picked up the pen slowly, her hand trembling. Everyone in the room was watching her, waiting for her to break. Tears formed in her eyes, not because of the prenup itself, but because she knew what it meant. It meant they saw her as nothing, as disposable, as someone who didn't deserve to even sit at the same table as them. The prenup stripped her of any legal right to his wealth, current or future, no matter how long they stayed married. If they divorced, she'd leave with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no settlement, no share in assets or properties. It wasn't about money. It was about the insult, the erasure of everything she had given him when he had nothing. But she wasn't marrying him for money. She never was. She was marrying him because they had history, because she loved him, because she believed in their journey. But standing there, watching the man she once called her future hold his mother's silence like a shield, she felt the first fracture in her soul. She closed her eyes, signed the paper, and slid it across the table. The moment the pen left her hand, so did something else. Her peace, her pride, her belief in him. The room didn't celebrate her signature. They simply nodded, satisfied, as if they had won a battle she wasn't even fighting. His mother sneered. "Now you can get married. Just know your place," she said, adjusting her wrapper before walking out with her chin high. Her fiancé finally came to her, reached for her hand, and said, "You know, this is just formalities. My mom just needs reassurance." She didn't respond. She looked at him with new eyes, not the eyes of a girl in love, but of a woman who had just sacrificed her dignity to protect what was left of her heart. Deep down, something inside her knew this marriage would be war. But she still held on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, it would all be worth it. She didn't know then that this signature, this quiet surrender, would become the first weapon they'd use to break her. And the story that no one knew was the one that came before it all. It started in the most ordinary way. Two young students meeting at a university registration queue. He was disorganized, barely had the right documents, and was on the verge of giving up when she stepped in. With a calm voice and a confident smile, she helped him sort his papers. That simple gesture turned into a conversation, and from that conversation grew a friendship, and from that friendship, something deeper. He was charming in his own way, but clearly struggling. He couldn't afford textbooks, had no laptop, and often skipped meals to save money. She learned all of this in bits, and with each new detail, her heart grew more attached. She wasn't wealthy either, but her parents were responsible and hard-working, giving her enough to live modestly. It wasn't pity that drew her to him, it was compassion, and a dangerous kind of love that made her feel like she was his lifeline. She gave him money for food, paid his internet subscription so he could do his assignments, and sometimes helped pay his school fees when he fell short. He would call her my angel, and it made her feel irreplaceable. Their bond deepened over time. He became more dependent on her, emotionally, financially, and mentally. She would wake up early to cook for him before her own classes, and stay up late helping him with his coursework. Sometimes she would even send extra money home to his mother, who would later act like she never existed. At the time, she didn't think of these as sacrifices. It felt natural, like love being put into action. Her friends would joke that she was raising a husband, but she would laugh it off, confident that he would one day remember everything she did for him. He, on the other hand, grew bolder with his dependence. He became used to asking, used to receiving, used to not saying thank you. But she didn't care. She was in love. And love, to her, was an investment, one she was willing to go bankrupt for if it meant keeping them together. She believed that every struggle they went through together would strengthen them in the future. What she didn't realize was that while she was building, he was only consuming. Looking back, there were red flags, moments when he would flirt with other girls or disappear for days with no explanation. Once, she saw a suspicious text on his phone and confronted him. He swore it meant nothing. She believed him. Or maybe she chose to believe because the truth would be too painful. Another time, she found out he went on a trip funded by another girl. He claimed it was a misunderstanding. Again, she forgave. She justified it as the mistakes of a young man trying to find himself. Her love made her blind. Or maybe it made her desperate. Because somewhere deep inside, she feared that if she stopped giving, he would stop loving. And in a world where her heart had already picked him, the idea of losing him felt worse than losing herself. What she didn't know was that this kind of love, this unreciprocated giving, would one day be used against her. The seeds of suffering were already planted. She just hadn't tasted the fruit yet. She was raised in a home filled with quiet dignity. Her parents weren't rich, but they were content. Her father was a retired civil servant who loved books and always told her, "What you give a man in love, you give without expecting back, but choose wisely whom you love." Her mother sold fabrics and managed the house with the strength of 10 women. Being their only child, they poured all their love and resources into her. But they also taught her to be independent, to fight for what she believed in. So when she brought him home and introduced him as the man she loved, they welcomed him warmly. Her father wasn't impressed by his background or his ambition, but he saw the way she looked at him. And so, like any good father, he gave her room to make her choices, even though he suspected her heart would one day break. Her mother, however, wasn't so reserved. She once said, "Just make sure this boy won't drown you while you're busy trying to save him." But the girl didn't listen. She thought her love would keep her afloat. She bore the weight of the relationship entirely on her shoulders. When he had no shoes for his project defense, she bought him a pair with the money meant for her semester textbooks. When he fell sick and couldn't afford treatment, she skipped her exams to stay by his side at the clinic. No one saw those sacrifices. Not his family, not his friends, and certainly not him. To the outside world, it looked like he was just a struggling student with a strong woman behind him. But to her, he was her future, and building him felt like building their life. She would always say, "He has potential. He just needs someone who believes in him." She didn't realize that belief, when given to someone undeserving, can become your prison. She wasn't just sacrificing money. She was sacrificing time, health, self-worth, and the better options she turned down because she believed in what they had. She didn't see the bars forming around her, not yet. There were suitors, better men, men who were already established. One of them, a quiet but successful pharmacist, had even told her, "You're too valuable to be begging for love." But she rejected them all. In her mind, to leave her boyfriend now, after all they'd been through, would be betrayal. She had gone too deep, loved too hard, waited too long. Her friends grew tired of advising her. Some left. Some stayed and watched silently. But no one could change her mind. She was sure that one day he would stand tall, look back, and say, "I wouldn't be here without her." She just wanted to hear those words. She wanted to be acknowledged, respected, chosen. But what she didn't know was that sometimes the ones you build from the ground up are the first to burn your ladder the moment they see the sky. The first time she caught him cheating, it was with a girl from their faculty, a loud, flashy girl who was always on campus flaunting new phones and braided hair she claimed came directly from Ghana. She had ignored the rumors until the girl sent her a screenshot, a text from her boyfriend saying, "Don't worry about her. She's just the girl feeding me for now." Her hands shook as she read it. Her world crashed. Her lungs felt too tight to hold air. She confronted him immediately, and he denied it with so much confidence that even she began to doubt what she saw. When she showed him the screenshot, he laughed bitterly and said, "That girl just wants to break us up. You believe her over me." He broke down in tears, held her legs, and swore on his life that it was all fake, manipulated. The part of her that knew he was lying screamed in silence, but her heart, her foolish, bleeding heart, chose to believe him. It was easier to forgive than to accept she had wasted her youth on someone who didn't value her. That forgiveness didn't come cheap. It came with late-night cries into her pillow, long walks alone around campus, and declining grades from assignments she could no longer concentrate on. Her heart wasn't just broken, it was bleeding in silence, and she smiled through the pain because she didn't want anyone to say, "We told you so." Her friends, who had once supported her, began to distance themselves. They didn't want to be part of her self-inflicted pain anymore. Even her mother stopped trying to convince her to leave him. "You'll learn the hard way," her mother finally said one day. And learn she did. But instead of leaving, she doubled down, gave even more, cooked more, helped him study, bought him a better phone when his screen cracked. She convinced herself that if she loved him enough, he would grow. She romanticized his betrayal as youthful confusion. He will outgrow this, she told herself, over and over again, like a prayer to a God that had already gone silent on her behalf. But he didn't stop. There were other girls, other screenshots, other whispers in lecture halls and backstreets. Sometimes it wasn't even hidden. She would find makeup stains on his clothes or random ATM withdrawals at midnight that he couldn't explain. And every time he would return with the same crocodile tears, the same empty promises, the same half-hearted apologies. And she, drunk in love and dizzy from years of sacrifice, would forgive him again. Every scar on her heart became a thread in the rope tying her to him. She didn't even recognize herself anymore. The strong, confident girl her parents raised was now a ghost who bent over backward for a man who couldn't even spell loyalty. But love makes fools of even the wisest, and she was too far gone to stop. She told herself it would all be worth it one day. The heartbreak, the silence, the insults, the waiting. She believed, with all her heart, that the man she fell for would eventually become the man she deserved. After graduation, reality hit harder than any exam they had faced in school. Jobs were scarce, and he had no plans, just dreams and excuses. While others were chasing opportunities, he was always at home, scrolling endlessly through social media, complaining about how Nigeria is messed up and how the system is rigged. She didn't wait for him to ask. She found him a place to stay. A tiny one-room apartment on the outskirts of town, close to the mechanic workshop he once worked at part-time. She paid the first year's rent with her NYSC savings, furnished it modestly, bought a small mattress, a gas cooker, and stocked the kitchen with food. He cried when she handed him the keys and called her his destiny helper. Her heart swelled. In that moment, she believed it had all been worth it, that now they were finally building something together. She imagined them growing together, starting from nothing and climbing their way up hand in hand. But she didn't know she was the only one climbing. She found work faster than him. A front desk role in a small private firm that paid just enough to cover her transport, her own upkeep, and still help him survive. Every Friday, she would split her salary into two, one part for herself and the larger part for him. He always had a reason: fuel for job interviews, transport to submit CVs, repairs for his borrowed laptop. She never complained, even when it meant skipping lunch or walking home. She believed in him, perhaps too much. She encouraged him to try entrepreneurship, helped him design flyers for a proposed barbing salon, and even borrowed money from a friend to help him register his first business name. Everything she did with a hopeful heart. Not because she was desperate, but because she believed that loving someone meant standing by them until they rose. She didn't understand yet that some people prefer to be carried forever, and once they learn to lean, they forget how to stand on their own. He grew comfortable in her efforts. He stopped searching for jobs altogether and would sleep all day while she worked. When she returned at night, he would complain about the food or ask why she didn't buy him a new phone case like she promised. She should have seen it then, the rot in the foundation. But love had clouded her judgment. Her dreams of building a man blinded her to the reality that not every man wants to be built. Some simply want to be served. She was his sponsor, his emotional dumpster, his cook, his cleaner, his lover, his everything. And he was just there, taking, enjoying, laughing with his friends about how lucky he was to have her. They would tease him, "Guy, if not me, I go marry her sharp-o." And he would laugh, slap their shoulders, and say, "Leave matter for Matthias." He didn't know that behind every meal she cooked, every kobo she gave, and every bill she paid, a little piece of her soul was dying quietly. The change came suddenly, like a storm that no one predicted. A friend of his uncle mentioned a company that was looking for marketing trainees. She rewrote his CV, printed it, and paid for his transport. He got the job. His salary was modest, but it was the beginning of something new. Within 6 months, he had bought a used car, a white Toyota Corolla, that he paraded like a trophy. And with that car came a new wardrobe, a new attitude, and a new circle of friends. He started hanging out more with flashy colleagues who introduced him to clubs and high-end lounges. Slowly, the man she once knew disappeared. She was no longer the woman he called during lunch breaks or the one he rushed home to after work. Now he was always too busy or tired. He would come home late, smelling of alcohol and cheap perfume. His texts became cold. His tone became condescending. "Don't stress me a beg," became his new favorite phrase. And yet, she stayed. She watched as the man she built used his new platform to erase the history that made him. He told people he hustled his way to the top, never once mentioning the girl who gave up her comfort to make him stand. He began referring to her as too clingy, even though she was the one holding him together. When he bought his second car, a sleek black Camry, he didn't even inform her. She found out through his WhatsApp status. When she asked why he didn't tell her, he said, "Do I need to report everything to you?" The more he rose, the more she felt herself shrinking in his eyes. She had become invisible, a shadow following him while he bathed in the spotlight she lit for him. The man she loved was gone. In his place stood a proud, arrogant stranger who believed he had arrived. And all she had to show for her years of sacrifice were scars and silence. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Her once bright eyes were dull, her shoulders hunched. Her voice lacked the fire it once had. That night, she decided to leave. She packed a small bag, wrote him a letter explaining her decision, and waited for morning. But when he came home and saw the bag, he broke down, begged like never before. He cried. He knelt. He held her feet and swore on his mother's life that he had lost himself but was ready to change. And because she still loved him, despite everything, she gave him one last chance. What she didn't know was that this second chance would cost her more than the first. He would drag her through fire and still come out with a dry shirt. And when his mother returned, everything she endured would be forgotten, replaced with mockery, betrayal, and the most humiliating signature of her life. She thought giving him one more chance would heal the wounds, that maybe, just maybe, the man he used to be would find his way back to her. For a short time, he pretended to change. He stayed home more, called her during work breaks, and even bought her a new handbag, the first gift he'd ever given her, without her asking. She tried to convince herself that he was trying, that his tears were real, and that maybe this was their second beginning. But deep down, a silent storm brewed in her soul. Every time he smiled at her, she found herself searching for lies in his eyes. Every time he spoke, she braced for betrayal hidden in his tone. She had loved him so much that even his absence had felt like presence. Now that he was physically near, but emotionally absent, she felt lonelier than ever. The emotional intimacy they once had, those late-night talks, shared fears and dreams, had died, replaced with uncomfortable silences and obligatory kisses that no longer carried warmth. She cried more than she smiled. She prayed more than she laughed. And each day, she questioned if love was supposed to feel like punishment. The man she used to confide in now rolled his eyes when she tried to express her pain. "Must we always talk about feelings?" he would grumble, annoyed by the emotional investment he once thrived on. She began to blame herself. Maybe she loved him too hard, gave too much, expected too much, held on too tightly. She stopped bringing up the cheating, stopped mentioning the money she once spent on him, stopped asking for anything. Instead, she settled for crumbs, a half kiss in the morning, a mumbled thanks after dinner, and empty apologies that filled the silence, but never changed the behavior. She was living with a stranger who wore her lover's face, and every moment beside him felt like a reminder that she was invisible, even in the arms of the man she once built from scratch. Her body began to show the weight of emotional exhaustion. She lost weight. Her hair thinned from stress. Her friends, now distant, occasionally reached out to check on her, but she had learned to lie well. "I'm fine," she'd say with a tired smile. No one knew she often slept with tears drying on her cheeks, or that she stayed up replaying moments of kindness from him, hoping they were real. She couldn't leave, not because she didn't want to, but because she had invested too much. Too many years. Too many sacrifices. She had nothing to return to but silence and shame, and the fear of starting over. To the outside world, they were a picture of a couple who had been through a lot. But to her, they were a dying story only she was trying to rewrite. She didn't know that the real battle hadn't even started yet, that the mother-in-law who once smiled politely in her presence was about to become the nightmare that would break whatever was left of her. His mother returned like a queen reclaiming a throne, confident, loud, and unapologetically arrogant. She had heard of her son's rising success and came to visit, to see how he's doing. But it was clear from the first day that she came with a mission, to remove the girl she never approved of. Her disapproval wasn't sudden. It had always been there, hidden behind fake smiles and dismissive compliments. But now, armed with her son's wealth and rising status, she no longer needed to pretend. She began with subtle digs. "You've lost weight, don't you cook good food anymore?" she'd ask with a smirk, even after eating a full plate. Then came the unsolicited advice. A good wife should know her husband's needs before he speaks, and "You're lucky he hasn't gone for someone better with all this money he's making." She said it all in front of him, but he never corrected her. Instead, he'd laugh awkwardly or pretend he didn't hear. That silence was louder than words. It told her everything she needed to know. One night, the mother-in-law called her aside, claiming she wanted a woman-to-woman talk. She sat her down, and with a tone dripping in disdain, said, "You think because you helped him during school, you've bought a permanent place in his life? My dear, men change. He's not that broke boy you fed rice and stew. Look around. Does it look like you still match his level?" Her words were poison, yet she sipped it quietly. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to remind this woman of the nights she cried herself to sleep for her son, of the meals she skipped to send money home when his mother was sick. But she didn't, because she knew that in their eyes, all her sacrifices were buried under the dirt of her poor background. In their story, she was a passerby, useful when needed, disposable when they had risen. And what broke her heart the most was that the man she loved, the man who once called her his angel, now watched silently as his mother tore her down piece by piece. Soon, the pressure grew unbearable. His mother began suggesting women to him, successful girls from her church, daughters of wealthy traders. "That one just got back from the UK, she'd say loudly. "She's well trained. You people will make good children." She said it all while she was in the kitchen, within earshot. When she confronted him, he said, "You know how my mom is. Just ignore her. I'm with you, not them." But his actions said otherwise. He no longer stood up for her. He no longer protected her from the insults. He was slowly becoming the man his mother had always wanted, proud, ungrateful, and detached from his roots. She realized that she was no longer a partner in the relationship. She was a relic of his past, a constant reminder of who he once was. And now that he had grown, he wanted to shed her like an old skin. But even after all that, when he said he still wanted to marry her, out of duty or guilt, she still said yes. Because she believed that after all the pain, marriage was the reward she earned. By the time he proposed, everything felt hollow. The words, the ring, the forced smile. There was no spark, no passion, just an obligation to fulfill a promise made years ago. He didn't kneel. There was no grand gesture, no romantic moment. Just a quiet evening in the living room where he said, "Let's just make this official already. You deserve it." The way he said "you deserve it" sounded less like love and more like compensation. She stared at the ring box in his hand, her heart a mixture of numbness and nostalgia. This wasn't how she dreamed of it. But then again, nothing about the relationship had gone as she dreamed. Still, she accepted. Not because she felt loved, but because she felt owed. After everything she gave up, time, money, dignity, youth, being his wife was the only thing left she believed she could hold on to. It was the only thing she asked for in return. She threw herself into the wedding preparations. Not because she was excited, but because she wanted to feel in control of something, anything. Her family offered to sponsor part of the event, but his mother refused. "This is our family's event. Let them just come and eat," she said. The weeks leading up to the wedding were brutal. His mother mocked her outfit choices, changed the catering plans without informing her, and even removed her parents' names from the souvenir tags. Every effort she made was trampled, every opinion dismissed. And still, her fiancé said nothing. Not a word in her defense. When she tried to complain, he'd say, "You know my mom. Just let her do her thing. Don't stress me." She swallowed her hurt and kept going. She wasn't marrying for their approval. She was marrying for her sanity, to prove to herself that everything she endured wasn't in vain, that all the years she spent building him had a destination, even if that destination was a broken promise wrapped in white lace. The night before the wedding, his mother called her into the study and dropped the prenup on the table. "You're signing this before tomorrow," she said coldly. "If you truly love my son and you're not here for his money, then prove it. Sign and show us you're not a gold digger." She stood frozen. No one had prepared her for this. Her fiancé wasn't there. He had gone out to unwind with his groomsmen. The woman handed her a pen. "No signature, no wedding," she added. And just like that, every memory she had of building him collapsed in her mind. It was never enough. She was never enough. But she signed it, not out of desperation, but out of exhaustion. Her hands trembled as she wrote her name, and in that moment she felt something in her break, something she could never get back. She didn't know then that the very paper meant to silence her would one day protect her, and the wedding they forced her into would become the doorway to their deepest regrets. She woke up on her wedding day feeling empty. There was no flutter of excitement, no joyful anticipation, no soft smile at the thought of forever. Only silence. Cold, aching silence. The kind that crept into your bones and made you question your every choice. Her friends helped her dress, forced laughter, and told her she looked stunning. She smiled mechanically, but inside she was sinking. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman in white, the girl who had once dreamed of a love story filled with passion, loyalty, and respect. The woman staring back at her was a shadow, one who had given too much and received too little. The signed prenuptial agreement felt like a stain on her soul, a symbol of how little she was worth to them. She was not their chosen bride. She was a tolerated one. And as she made her way to the church, her steps were heavy, like a prisoner walking toward a sentence she never chose. The ceremony was grand but hollow. The church was filled with the rich and the prideful, his family, his associates, socialites, and people who had no idea what it took for her to get to that altar. As she walked down the aisle, she could hear the murmurs, women whispering, "She's lucky he married her," and "I heard she'd beg for the wedding." Her heart thudded with pain. Even during the exchange of vows, he barely looked into her eyes. His tone was flat, robotic, as if he were reciting lines to fulfill a transaction. When it was her turn, she faltered, not because she forgot the words, but because she couldn't find her voice. Her father's eyes met hers from the front row, filled with concern, but he said nothing. Her mother wiped away a tear that wasn't from joy. It was a wedding, yes, but not a union. It was the closing act of a story where she had been the writer, editor, and unpaid actor, only to be given a silent role in the end. After the wedding, the reception was worse. His family took over everything. They danced like royalty, claimed the spotlight, and made speeches that erased her existence. No one thanked her for standing by him through his lowest years. No one mentioned her sacrifices. Instead, they praised him for choosing a humble wife, and joked that she had hit the jackpot. God lifted her from poverty to favor, his uncle said into the microphone, unaware that she had once paid for this same uncle's medication when he had nothing. She sat there, smiling politely as plates were passed and cameras flashed. Her gown was heavy, not from the fabric, but from the weight of betrayal stitched into every seam. Her husband barely touched her during the dance. He posed for pictures, whispered to other women, and drank until his words slurred. That night, when they were finally alone, he fell asleep drunk, still wearing his shoes, and she sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness, wondering what kind of hell she had walked into wearing white. The days after the wedding unfolded like scenes from a horror movie she couldn't escape. In public, they were the perfect couple. In private, she was invisible. His mother moved in for a few weeks, which turned into months. From day one, she ruled the house like a tyrant, demanding breakfast by 6 a.m., questioning her cooking, inspecting her clothes, and always reminding her, "This house was built by my son. Don't forget your place." Her husband said nothing. When she tried to speak to him about the toxic tension, he responded with a shrug. "Just ignore her. You know how she is." But ignoring became impossible when she started entering their bedroom unannounced, criticizing her scent, her sleepwear, even her body. "My son deserves better than a walking broomstick," she sneered one morning. The insult burned, but she swallowed it. Not out of weakness, but out of survival. She had come too far to let it break her now. But every day she endured in that house drained her spirit, her energy, and her dreams. Her husband was no better. The man she once held together with her bare hands now treated her like an obligation. He left home early, returned late, and spent weekends in hotels under the pretense of business trips. His calls became rare, his touch colder than steel. When she asked him to attend marriage counseling, he laughed and said, "We're not poor people looking for spiritual deliverance. I'm not interested in all that nonsense." She realized he didn't want help. He wanted freedom, freedom from the woman who reminded him of his humble beginnings. And the more he partied, drank, and paraded other women, the more his mother praised him. "My son is a man now, a real man, not that beggar you used to feed." The pain of hearing her sacrifices reduced to shame was unbearable. She couldn't cry anymore. Even her tears had run dry. Her silence became her armor, her only protection in a house where love was dead and dignity had no place. And yet she stayed, not because she was weak, but because she had no choice. Every day she planned to leave, something held her back. Fear, confusion, the shame of what people would say. "You suffered with him and still didn't enjoy the fruit," her conscience would mock. Her own parents didn't know the full truth. She protected him even in private disgrace, still hoping he might change. But the only thing that changed was her health. She began to fall sick often, her body reacting to the stress her mind could no longer carry. She went to bed with migraines and woke up with panic. She lived like a stranger in her own marriage. And every time she served his mother food and was insulted in return, a part of her heart whispered, "This is not the life you prayed for." But she didn't know that just ahead, something would happen. A gift from a father who had quietly watched her suffer. A gift that would not just open doors, but change everything. Years passed. Not months, years. And in that time, she faded from the vibrant, hopeful young woman who had once believed in love, into a hollow figure moving through life without purpose. Her friends were married and posting pictures of happy anniversaries, while she was hiding bruises, not on her skin, but in her soul. Her husband had become nothing more than a roommate, occasionally tossing insults her way, often sleeping in hotels or not coming home at all. His mother remained the permanent tenant of their home, still barking orders, still mocking her whenever the opportunity arose. "You're lucky he hasn't chased you out yet," the woman would say, not knowing how many nights she begged God for the courage to walk away. She would often sit by the window, staring out into the night, wondering how her life, once full of promise, had become a prison she built with her own hands. She no longer laughed, no longer dreamed. She went about her chores mechanically, Cooking, cleaning, washing, and pretending. She stopped calling her parents as often because they always asked how she was doing. She didn't know how to answer that anymore. Was she supposed to say, "I'm surviving," or "I'm trapped"? Even they noticed the change in her voice. Her mother once asked, "My daughter, are you truly happy?" And she lied as always. "Yes, Mama. I'm fine. Marriage just has its phases." But the truth was uglier. She was surviving in a house that drained her of everything: joy, pride, confidence. Her body aged faster than it should have. Her back ached from tension. Her mind began to spiral into anxiety and numbness. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. But where would she go? And with what? The prenup they made her sign had left her with nothing to claim. She was legally married to a man who gave her nothing, not even the right to leave with dignity. Then one afternoon, a phone call came that shook the foundation of her sorrow. Her father asked to see her, urgently. She left immediately, heart pounding with fear. He was already old, fragile, his hair now white, his hands trembling slightly. But his eyes were clear. He held her hand and said, "I've watched you suffer in silence for too long. I may not live forever, but I won't die watching my only daughter be reduced to nothing." He handed her a file, a will. Years ago, he had invested in a small tech company out of curiosity. That company had just been acquired by an international firm, and his shares had skyrocketed beyond imagination. He was now a billionaire, quietly, and every kobo was in her name. "They treated you like trash," he said, his voice shaking. "But now, you'll rise not by their name, but by your own. This is your freedom." She broke into tears, not because of the money, but because, for the first time in years, someone had finally seen her pain and said, "Enough." She sat in stunned silence, her father's words echoing in her mind like distant thunder. A billionaire? Her father? The quiet, humble man who had always taught her the value of small things and simple living? She stared at the documents before her. Legal papers, share certificates, bank account details with numbers that didn't look real. It felt like fiction, like a movie playing out in someone else's life. But it was real. Her father had made a quiet fortune from stocks in a tech company that had now gone global, and he had never told anyone. He said he was saving it for a day when his daughter would need to remember who she was, when the world had stolen so much from her that she could barely find her reflection. She wept, her head on his frail chest, as he stroked her hair and whispered, "My daughter, you gave everything. Now it's time you receive, without begging. You don't need anyone's permission to breathe again." As she held the documents close, a storm brewed in her heart, not of vengeance, but of liberation. For years, she had walked in the shadows, thinking that marriage was her only reward for loyalty. She had been mocked, belittled, and made to feel worthless. But now everything changed. The wealth wasn't what made her powerful. It was what the wealth represented: freedom, choice, a voice. She returned home that evening with a different stride. Her eyes had changed. The woman who once cowered at insults now walked past her mother-in-law without a word. She cooked dinner for herself only. She no longer flinched when her husband walked in drunk. She slept in a separate room. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. And that silence was the loudest shift in her spirit. They noticed. They just didn't understand, not yet, that the woman they had buried had been resurrected by the love of a father who refused to watch her die in shame. Her father passed away a week later, but not before signing the final handover with his lawyer. At the reading of the will, it was revealed that his entire fortune, including land, stock, foreign accounts, and company shares, were in her name, his only child. She cried again, not for the money, but because the only person who had never asked her to prove her worth had now given her the world. The in-laws heard about the inheritance from whispers and social media. The story trended after a major business magazine named her among the top 5 youngest billionaires in the region. Suddenly, the poor girl they once called a gold digger had become the treasure. Her husband, who hadn't come home in 2 nights, came back the next morning with flowers. Her mother-in-law, who hadn't spoken to her in days, asked if she wanted tea. But she said nothing. She simply looked at them both with calm eyes, then picked up her father's photo and smiled. "I'm ready now, Papa," she whispered. The storm was coming, and this time it was hers to command. When the news reached her in-laws, it shattered everything they thought they knew. Her mother-in-law nearly choked on her morning pap when she saw the headline: "Daughter of late mogul emerges as major shareholder in global tech merger." Her mouth fell open, the spoon frozen mid-air. Her husband, now barely relevant in his office after a recent misconduct warning, read the article twice, each word pressing into his ego like a knife. "This can't be the same girl," he muttered. But it was. The same girl they once refused to greet at family gatherings. The same girl his mother had accused of eating too much rice during Christmas. The same girl they made sign a prenuptial agreement because they believed she was after their son's wealth. That same girl was now wealthier than all of them combined, and she hadn't even lifted a finger. It wasn't hard work that gave her this revenge, it was fate. And fate had an impeccable sense of timing. They came to her like ants to sugar. That morning, her husband sat her down and suggested they start afresh. His voice was uncharacteristically soft. "I've made mistakes, babe," he said, "but we've been through so much together. Let's build something real now." She looked at him as he reached for her hand, the same hand he once ignored when she reached for him in tears. She didn't speak. She simply stood up and walked into her room, leaving the door ajar. That was his first warning. The second came the next day, when his mother called a family meeting and tried to pressure her into joining accounts with her husband for the sake of marital unity. They framed it as tradition, as honor, as love, but it reeked of desperation. "Let's just merge everything and move forward," her husband said, forcing a smile. "No secrets." But she only smiled back, cold and composed. "Then I guess I should also share my lawyer's number with you," she replied, and the room fell into silence. That evening she filed for divorce. Not with noise, not with insults, but with precision. Her lawyer arrived at their home with prepared documents, and she served them both like a final meal. Her husband stared at the papers, mouth agape. "You're divorcing me?" he asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "Just like that." She looked him in the eyes, her voice steady. "Not just like that. Like everything you made me feel, without warning, without apology, without value." His mother lunged forward, trying to plead. "You can't do this. This will disgrace us." But she had heard enough of that word, disgrace. She had tasted it every day of her marriage. Now it was their turn. She closed the folder, handed it to her lawyer, and said, "I'll see you in court." And as she turned to walk away, she didn't cry, didn't look back. The girl they mocked had grown into a woman they could no longer control, and their panic was just beginning. She moved out within a week, not because she was chaste, but because she had already outgrown the prison they called a home. She didn't take anything from the house except her clothes and a framed photo of her father. She left the furniture, the bed, the wedding portraits, every artifact of that broken life. She moved into a high-rise apartment in the city, purchased in her name, paid in full. The first night she slept there, she lay on the bare mattress with no lights, no curtains, and no noise. And yet it was the most peaceful sleep she'd had in years. The silence was no longer lonely. It was healing. The next morning, she walked barefoot across the marble floor, brewed a cup of tea, and looked out from the balcony at the city below. It was hers now, not the city, but her life, her choices, her identity. No more begging to be loved. No more earning worth through pain. She was no longer a wife. She was a woman reborn. Her phone buzzed endlessly, messages from her husband, his mother, relatives who once ignored her. Some tried guilt, others tried praise, a few tried threats disguised as advice. But she didn't answer. She let them talk to the voicemail of their own regret. She spent her days meeting with advisors, planning how to grow the assets her father left behind, and finding herself again. She took dance classes. She reconnected with old friends. She bought her mother a new home. And through it all, she never once spoke publicly about her divorce. She refused interviews. She declined features. She didn't need the world to clap for her. Their silence had been loud enough when she suffered. Her revenge wasn't noise. It was elegance. And her power wasn't in money. It was in walking past the people who tried to bury her and letting them choke on their own dust. One afternoon, she ran into her ex-husband at a supermarket. He looked thinner, older, more restless. His once smooth face was now marred by stress. The glow of wealth had left him. He tried to smile. "You look different," he said. She simply nodded. "I know." There was no malice in her voice, no bitterness. Only grace. That was what destroyed him most, the fact that she had no hatred left for him. She had healed. And that healing had made her untouchable. He tried to talk, to say something meaningful, but his voice cracked. She placed a hand on his shoulder gently and said, "Take care of yourself." And with that, she walked away. Not because she wanted him to suffer, but because she no longer belonged in his world. She had been a wife. Now she was a queen. Not the kind that wore a crown, but the kind that built her own throne from broken pieces and never asked anyone to sit beside her. Her ex-husband's downfall was not sudden. It was gradual, humiliating, and poetic. After the divorce was filed, everything he had built began to collapse. His company, already losing faith in his ability to represent their image due to his nightlife scandals, put him on a performance review. But it was too late. Pictures began surfacing online. Him kissing random women at lounges, stumbling out of clubs drunk, caught in verbal altercations with hotel staff. Stories began to circulate, anonymously at first, about how he mistreated his wife and disrespected the people who once lifted him. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, became his greatest curse. The final blow came when the company officially terminated his contract. The same people who once sang his praises were now deleting pictures with him, blocking his number, and distancing themselves to save their own brands. He tried to recover, tried to secure consulting gigs, but the doors had closed. His phone calls went unanswered. His name was no longer an asset. It was a liability. With no income and mounting debts from his lavish lifestyle, he was forced to sell his second car. Then the first. Then the apartment she once helped him rent. He moved back to his mother's home, a bitter irony he never saw coming. The woman who once controlled everything with her pride now sat quietly in the living room, unable to face the whispers of the neighbors. Didn't they chase that poor girl away? See them now. Even the dog looks hungry. Pride had brought them this far. Pride, and the assumption that people like her would never rise. But rise she did. And now, they were choking on the smoke of their own burned bridges. He would sometimes sit outside at night, scrolling through her pictures online, her attending a gala, launching a business branch, smiling beside powerful dignitaries. He could see her, but he could no longer touch her world. He tried to call her once more. It rang, but she didn't answer. He sent a long message, pouring out apologies, blaming his downfall on stress, claiming he never stopped loving her. She read the message, and for a brief second, her heart ached. Not because she still loved him, but because she remembered the girl who once did. The girl who cried into her pillow, waited at the door, begged for scraps of affection. That girl had died the day she signed those divorce papers. She didn't reply. She forwarded the message to her lawyer and asked them to ensure no further contact could be made. The silence she offered him wasn't out of cruelty. It was mercy. She had no more battles to fight. He had lost the only woman who ever believed in him, and now, with no one left to lie to, he had to face the man he truly was, broken, forgotten, and crawling through the ruins he built with his own hands. She returned to their old house once, not for them, but for closure. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and her new life had flourished beyond even her imagination. But something in her heart whispered that she needed to stand in that space one more time, not as a victim, but as the woman who survived. She didn't announce her visit. She simply walked through the compound gates, which now looked worn and dusty. The flowers she once planted had withered. The paint on the walls had begun to peel. It was no longer the house they had decorated for the wedding. It was a decaying monument to pride and ingratitude. Her mother-in-law opened the door and froze at the sight of her. She was wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, her face calm, untouched by makeup, yet radiant with peace. What are you doing here?" the older woman stammered. But for the first time, her voice held no power. "I came to say thank you," she said. The older woman blinked in confusion. "Thank you for showing me who I never want to become. Thank you for teaching me the price of dignity." Her voice was soft, but it echoed like thunder in the silent hallway. Her ex-husband came out, looking disheveled, dressed in a faded t-shirt and mismatched slippers. The sight of him made her heart still. Not out of love or hate, but relief. Relief that she had escaped. He didn't speak. He just stared at her as though seeing a ghost. She walked around the living room slowly, her fingers trailing over the furniture she once cleaned, the couch she once sat on while being insulted. Everything looked smaller now, duller. She turned to them both and said, "I survived. Not because you allowed me to, but because I found myself when you tried to erase me." The word stung, not shouted, not screamed, just spoken with the calmness of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Her mother-in-law broke into tears and fell to her knees. "Please forgive me. I didn't know. I was just trying to protect my son." But she had heard enough. Protect him from what? From the woman who fed him? The woman who clothed him when he had holes in his shoes? She walked to the door and paused. "You didn't destroy me," she said. "You revealed me." Then she stepped outside and didn't look back. She left the house like a queen exiting a courtroom, her head high, her heart healed. The same house that once echoed with insults had now been silenced by her dignity. And as the door closed behind her, she knew she would never return, not even in memory. That chapter was over. She was done trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding her. The same house that laughed now wept in silence. And she had finally walked away, not in pain, but in power. The courtroom was silent as her name was called. She stepped forward in her fitted black dress, heels clicking gently against the marble floor. Her face was serene. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even angry. This was just a formality, a final step in removing the last tie to a man who had once tied her in emotional chains. He was already seated, his face gaunt, suit wrinkled, eyes hollow. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. He just looked at her. She didn't return his gaze. Her focus was on the judge. Her lawyer presented the documents, including the prenup that had once been her humiliation. Now it was her liberation. Based on the agreement signed prior to marriage, the lawyer said, the respondent is entitled to nothing from the petitioner's estate. All claims to shared property are void. The judge nodded. No objections. It was all legally airtight. He would walk out with nothing. Exactly what they had planned for her. He tried to speak, tried to give one last plea, "Your Honor, if I may," but the judge cut him off. "You had your time. This is not a negotiation. This is a conclusion." And with a final bang of the gavel, the divorce was granted. Clean, final, irreversible. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She stood, thanked the judge, and walked out. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. News had already spread about her identity and the scandalous fall of her ex-husband. Microphones were shoved in her face. "Do you feel vindicated? Is it true you funded his education? Are you seeing someone new?" But she smiled, shook her head gently, and walked past them all. She had no words for the world. Her victory didn't need public validation. It was stitched quietly into the pages of her heart, where no microphone could reach. She didn't need the world to cheer for her. She just needed her own soul to rest. And finally, it was. As she stepped into her car and drove off, the past began to fall away behind her like dust in the wind. No more court dates. No more insult-ridden dinners. No more trying to earn love that should have been freely given. She was now a woman with no shackles, no guilt, no apologies. She looked out the window at the same city where she once begged, sacrificed, and cried, and she smiled. Not because she had won, but because she had survived. The courtroom wasn't just an ending. It was a rebirth. And as her car disappeared into the horizon, so did the last shadow of her old life. It was done, finished, closed. And all that remained was a woman standing tall in her truth, unashamed of her journey, untouched by bitterness, and unafraid of what lay ahead. She no longer introduced herself as Mrs. Anything. She was done attaching her name to someone who once treated her like an unwanted burden. Now when people addressed her, they used her full name. No prefixes, no apologies, no attachments. And with that name came a quiet but commanding presence. She started building her father's company into something larger than he ever imagined. She didn't hire celebrities or influencers to promote it. She hired women like herself, overlooked, underestimated. Women who had spent years building others, but had nothing to show for it. They became the backbone of her board, her operations, her leadership. Each decision she made was rooted in compassion, wisdom, and clarity born from pain. Her company quickly gained a reputation not just for its financial success, but for its heart. The same society that once dismissed her now whispered her name with awe. "That's the woman who rose from dust," they said. But she didn't correct them. Let them believe it was magic. Only she knew it was forged from years of suffering. Her new apartment became her sanctuary. It wasn't the biggest in the city, but it had large windows, clean white walls, and peace. The one thing she had never truly known. She decorated it with books, plants, art from local female painters. Every piece told a story of women who had walked through fire and came out glowing. She spent her evenings reading, sometimes on the balcony with a glass of Zobo, watching the world move without her needing to chase it. No more begging for love. No more crying for validation. She still remembered the past, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. That pain had birthed this version of her. She still lit a candle every night for her father, placing it beside his framed picture with the inscription he once whispered to her. "You don't have to fight to be seen. You already are." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. She reconnected with herself, and slowly, the woman she was meant to be emerged fully. Friends she lost along the way found her again, amazed by her strength. Her mother came to live with her occasionally, and they spent weekends laughing, cooking, and healing. Men approached her. Yes, but now she saw clearly. She wasn't looking to build anyone. She was looking to walk beside someone who was whole. For now, she remained alone, but never lonely. Her solitude was soft, safe, sacred. She no longer sought applause. Her silence had become her victory speech. She didn't chase revenge. She didn't need to. The world had watched the rise of a woman they once mocked. The poor girl. The helper. The gold digger. The one who signed the prenup. They saw her now, not as someone's wife, but as a force, a woman who rebuilt herself with her own bare hands. And in that quiet, dignified life, she had found her new name, freedom. The years passed, but regret never left their home. Her ex-husband aged too, quickly. His shoulders slouched, his confidence shattered. He took odd jobs, lived off borrowed money, and spent most nights drinking alone. Each failed job application reminded him of what he lost, not just a wife, but a woman who carried him on her back through storms. He would sit in the corner of his mother's living room, staring at old wedding photos, wondering how he didn't see her worth. He replayed the moments, the day she signed the prenup, the night she cooked when he came home drunk, the time she wiped vomit off his shoes after a club night. She had been his everything, and now he had nothing. His mother, too, became a shadow of her former self. Once feared, now ignored. The same neighbors who praised her pride now crossed the street when she walked by. Her grandchildren never came. Her house, once full of noise and control, had gone quiet with shame. They tried to rewrite history. They told people, "She misunderstood us. We were just protecting our son." She didn't even tell us her father was wealthy. But no one believed them. Everyone remembered how they treated her, how they called her a leech, how they made her sign away her rights, how they humiliated her during the wedding. Even distant relatives, who once laughed behind her back, now secretly admired her. They told their daughters to be like her, strong, dignified, wise. The same name they used to insult had become a benchmark for resilience. But for her ex-husband and his mother, the damage was permanent. It wasn't just that she left. It was that she left and never looked back. That she succeeded without them. That she found joy in a world they were no longer welcome in. Every time she appeared on TV or was featured in a magazine, it stung. Her silence screamed. Her absence haunted them more than any insult ever could. One evening, they saw her on television, attending a book launch, smiling beside international leaders, dressed in a gold gown that glowed under the lights. She was laughing, not politely, not guardedly, but with her whole chest, free, alive, untouched. The camera zoomed in, and for a second it felt like she was looking straight at them, not with vengeance, but with peace. It was a moment that said, "You lost me." And that was the greatest loss of your life. Her ex-husband turned off the TV and sat in silence. He tried to speak, but tears came instead. His mother watched him, then looked away. There was nothing left to say. No apology would bring her back. No regret could undo the years of damage. They had mocked the woman who would one day become everything they were not. And now, she lived a life they could only watch from the sidelines. That was the kind of regret no time could ever erase. And she, the girl they once silenced, had become the woman they could never forget. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.